Chapter 22. Achilles had let Odysseus go without hesitation. Aware that his friend was under incredible pressure, the startling arrival of so many people from Partha was enough to even disturb the archer. He was astounded by their dedication, even to someone whom Achilles himself would have trusted with his life. His thoughts were interrupted by Cerynthia, who suddenly gasped and turned in the direction that he had last seen Odysseus go. Barely had she done so when he too sensed that there was something terribly wrong going on. Something involving Odysseus and Mendel. "Stay here," he shouted at her. Racing past startled townsfolk, the archer unlooped his bow. He knew that the jungle presented an even trickier environment than his native forest, but all he asked for was one clean shot. That was all he needed, providing, of course, that he was not already too late. I wanted to do this in private, so that others with a possible interest in the Nephilim would not take notice, Lucian remarked to his helpless captive. There are so many others who would be interested, yes, and besides, anything my dear sister takes an interest in is deserving of such caution. His eyes were no longer human and reminded Odysseus too much of Lilith's. They appraised the farmer again and again, seeking that which Odysseus himself felt was not there. She is cunning, and her mind is like a labyrinth. I wasn't too sad when I learned, centuries later, that the angel had cast her out into the endless void, never to return. He laughed. Well, never is a relative term with her. Inarius should have known better. He should have slain her, but his kind always was too sentimental. A sudden crackle of blue energy engulfed Odysseus. He let out a cry, but the sound was smothered. If this told Lucian anything, he did not reveal it. Instead, the demon nodded to himself, then said, "There remains only the question of your brother and what has a hold over him. I lied about so many things, but not that. Something of a demonic nature does hold sway over him, and yet it's also something else. Perhaps I'll make a study of both of you. Would you like that?" "Damn you." "Thank you. I already am. Shall we go?" Lucian smiled wider, and the world around Odysseus took on a hazy, unsubstantial appearance. Somewhere in the background, the faint images of the interior of some great structure, the main temple, Odysseus assumed with a shock, began to form. And at that moment, the scene illuminated by the energy surrounding Odysseus, a feathered bolt struck the Primus directly in the throat. Lucian's head swung back from the force. Blood spilled from the ugly wound. The head of the arrow lay embedded so deep it was a wonder to Odysseus that it had not come out in the back. "Odysseus," called Achilles, "try to free yourself." He had been attempting just that since his capture, only to fail miserably each time. Odysseus had used Mendel's advice again, but to no avail. He began to wonder if it had merely been by chance and whatever power his brother had wielded that he had escaped then. As ever, Lilia's mocking words returned. He was nothing. Nothing. A whistling sound presaged another arrow soaring at Lucian. Knowing Achilles' skill, Odysseus had no doubt that it would hit exactly where the archer intended. But at the last second, Lucian's hand caught the bolt just an inch from his chest. He easily snapped it in two, and as the pieces fell, reached up to take the one buried in his throat. The Primus pulled at the arrow. With a horrific sucking sound, it came free. He inhaled, and the blood dripping from his wound receded into the gap, which then healed shut. From somewhere to Odysseus' left, Achilles let out a curse, then growled, "Not again." Lucian eyed the blood still on the tip of the arrow. His tongue shot out and lapped up the red liquid, leaving the arrow perfectly clean. The demon chuckled as he tossed the shaft to the side. "Able to make a perfect strike at night even from a bow enchanted to miss. A fine Morlu you would make," he said. "Would you like to join us?" The Primus gestured. Achilles grunted. Odysseus heard the shuffling of feet and guessed that the hunter was being forced forward. "I have not had this much activity in centuries. their captor mocked. I had forgotten how delicious it was doing it myself instead of relying on fallible mortals. Without warning, a different missile came at him. However, where Achilleos' arrow had struck true, this one, a rock, bounced away after hitting what seemed an invisible shield around Lucian. That, though, did not stop a storm of more rocks, bits of wood, and other unidentifiable objects. Many were tossed with terrible aim, but several others would have hit their target if not for the same force that had repelled the first rock. And from all through the jungle, completely surrounding the trio, the people of Partha, led by Cyrus's daughter, emerged. "Let him go," shouted Cerenthia. "Let them both go." Others took up the shout, Romus among their leaders. The townfolks brandished crude spears, axes, and pitchforks, the weapons of the common people. Several more objects flew at the Primus, with the same lack of result. For the first time, something other than arrogance filled the demon's visage. He surveyed the throng with tremendous interest. "Impressive," Lucian boomed. "I didn't sense their coming until just before the first stone cast." He eyed Odyssean again. "Could it be you, or maybe your brother?" The gaze narrowed. "No, I think it has something to do with you, pawn of my sister. I sense a connection spreading between all of these others, but originating, yes, that would make sense. It would have to be because of..." Lucian tread off in thought. Apparently taking this for hesitation, Romus let out a yell and led several of his fellows forward. Lucian stared at his oncoming attackers with bemusement. The ground around him erupted. People, trees, dirt, nothing escaped. An explosion ripped apart the jungle for yards around. Screams filled the air, and the night was momentarily blindingly bright. Odyssean did not fear for his own life, for not only would he have rather died at that moment, but the demon kept him protected. He was the only one, though, and his heart wailed at the thought of what was happening to all those who had come here because of him. It seemed to never end, and yet Lucian's spell, in truth, lasted but the blink of an eye. When it was done, there stood not a tree within 20 paces, and the ground not only crackled black, but underneath there was a fiery glow, as if the demon had, in the process, summoned up the anger of the world. The jungle had always been hot and humid, but now the very air burned. "A taste of what is to come," Lucian stated to no one in particular, "when this world is made over in our image." Moans arose. Odyssean smelled something horrible, something that he had not smelled since his family's death, the acrid stench of burning corpses. Yet these were not plague victims being incinerated to protect the living. These were innocent folk who had perished for no good reason, but that they had believed in Odyssean's naive promises. Something within him wrenched that tight. An overwhelming tangle of emotions swept through Odyssean. He relived every mistake, every catastrophe. With an anguished cry, Odyssean struggled to free himself. Struggled, and failed again. "I see you're anxious to return to the temple as I am," jested Lucian. The towering figure surveyed the carnage he had caused. The fiery cracks in the ground illuminated his face with ghastly perfection. "And since there really is nothing of value left here, we might as well go now, don't you think?" But even as he spoke, another shaft struck him in the chest. However, unlike the first, this one bounced off with no visible effect. Out of the corner of his eye, Odyssean saw Achilleos quickly notching another arrow. The blond archer kept his gaze on the demon as he worked. Lucian tisked. "I said that you would make a splendid Morlu, but to do that you must die." Achilleos fired. "And so you shall," continued his target. The arrow curved around in mid-flight. Achilleos stumbled back, one arm going up in defense. The bolt caught him through the throat, exactly where the demon had been hit. But where Lucian was a demon, Achilleos was only mortal. A scream echoed through the ruined jungle. However, it came not from the hunter, but rather Cerenthia. As Achilleos crumpled into a limp heap, Cyrus's daughter ran to him. She caught him just before he would have struck his head on an overturned tree. "Oh, Achilles, no, no!" The man in her arms had no words for her, and his gaze was empty. He had died instantly, although not due to any kindness on Lucian's part. The Primus now extended a hand towards Serenthia. "How delicious. Come to me, my dear. Let me comfort you in your loss." She struggled to maintain hold of Achilles as she was pulled forward by the demon's sorcery. Lucian's power dragged her across steaming, molten gaps and ragged patches of burnt ground. Serenthia was finally unable to maintain her grip, and the limp body of the hunter was left behind. It was all coming to an end now. Odyssean's humiliation had brought with it the death of his friends and his brother. He had to assume that Mendel was no more, or else where was he? And Sari was, like him, to be a victim of another sort. It might have been different if the power he had thought he wielded had been truth. Then, Odyssean could have at least tried to make a stand, possibly save his friends from sharing his fate. However, he was no threat to Lucian. He was nothing. Nothing. His gaze passed from the desperate Serenthia to Achilles' cold body and back again. They had fought for him more than once. They had believed in him, just as so many had. One of the Parthens suddenly ran up to help Cyrus's daughter. Romus, face disfigured far more than ever, took hold of her with his burnt hands. Another Parthen joined him, then another. Their added mass slowed but did not halt her progress. Lucian merely laughed at their antics. But as he laughed, a score more Parthens tried to charge him again. This time, they had weapons other than their axes and pitchforks. They used what some would have described as magic. Around the Primus, the air became a cornucopia of violent energies. Rocks appeared out of nowhere. A tree limb went flying at Lucian's handsome face, only to go bounding back. Among the fighters was Bartha, who had tears in her eyes and a grim set to her mouth. Odyssean noted with dismay that there was no sign of her son. He prayed that the boy was somewhere farther back, unharmed. "The potential is there," Lucian commented, nodding at his attackers in approval despite their dismal results. "But I think I'd prefer to test just the one and train the others from scratch. Less to unteach," he said, the last with a dark gaze at the Parthens. The jungle floor burst open around Bartha's group. The fiery molten earth below engulfed her and several of the others. Their screams filled Odyssean's ears. "No!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. His eyelids clamped together tightly as tears coursed down over his face. He beat his fists against the soil, repeating his anguished call. "No!" It took Odyssean a breath to notice that the rest of the area had fallen into silence again. He worried that the carnage Lucian had earlier wrought now faded in comparison to what had just happened. Tears continuing to streak down his face, the son of Diomedes opened his eyes. To his surprise, he beheld Bartha and the others untouched. A wall of formerly molten ground rose around them, yet it had obviously cooled completely, for one of the Parthens began cracking open the side with his foot and fist. Odyssean gave thanks for the miracle, then discovered two more. One was that Serenthia no longer helplessly moved toward Lucian. Instead, Romus and the others with him even now carried her away. The final, and to him in some ways most astonishing, miracles concerned himself. Odyssean no longer floated in the air. Only now did it register with him that he had been pounding his fists, that he knelt on the ground, that he, not Lucian, had made it so. Lilith had lied to Odyssean, which should not have surprised him. He could guess now that the reason he had been unable to fight her had been because of what he had once thought her to be. She had used that to crush his spirit further. Odyssean pushed himself up on one knee. His gaze grew terrible as he looked at his persecutor. The treacheries of Lucian and Lilith combined in his mind to further fuel his determination. No more, the once simple farmer intoned, rising. No more of this. The Primus did not smile now, and there was that in his face that hinted more than ever of his true, monstrous self. You do well not to provoke me, mortal. This kind and civilized exterior is a shell, nothing more. You do not want to anger what lurks just beneath. Shaking his head, Odyssean returned. You have it all wrong, Primus. Lucian, brother of Lilith. You should be careful not to provoke me any more. This caused the demon to howl with laughter, but Odyssean could almost swear that there was something too hollow to that laughter. There had been no reason why Lucian would have lessened his control over the human. Odyssean had freed himself, and that meant that the gift, no, birthright, Lilith had called it, flowed through him much as he once believed it. Perhaps not as powerful and as malleable as it had seemed, but certainly Lilith had lied when she had said he was nothing without her. Leave now, Odyssean suggested sharply. Leave now or finish it here. Lucian ceased laughing. The ground erupted anew, this time the force of it all centering around Odyssean. Hot ash rose up, covering him. Scalding earth bathed his body. As the ground crumbled, he started to sink beneath it. Odyssean took one stubborn step toward his adversary. When that succeeded, he took another. He paid no mind to the ash, to the fire-hot ground, and because of that, they did not harm him. In the back of his thoughts, Odyssean sensed those who had survived the demon's assaults gaining their own strength from his renewed confidence. They were more alive and well than could have hoped. That, in turn, gave Odyssean the impetus he needed to take another step, then another. And when he had crossed half the distance, it was to know that with amusement of his own, Lucian taking an unconscious step back. Will you not give me your blessing after all, Primus? A blessing such as your servant Malik gave the good master Ethon, his son, and others? The amusement vanished, replaced by disgust. You seem to favor it. I will give you my blessing, the demon croaked, his voice no longer at all cultured or even, for that matter, sounding human. And then I will dine on your entrails and drink your blood from a cup fashioned from your fragile skull. And as he spoke, the facade of humanity fell away. Lucian's aspect grew terrible to behold, even more so to Odyssean because there was no resemblance to Lilith after all. Lucian stood half again, taller than the demoness and much broader, but he, too, had the thorns that acted as a mane all the way down his scaled back. Yet where she had only one tail, her cursed brother had three, all spiked from the top to the tip, with dagger-like projects no longer than Odyssean's hand. Lucian took a step toward him again, and in doing so revealed that he also had the hooved legs his sister did. His hands were different, though, for the fingers on each numbered more than 5, and the claws were like those of a badger, but dripping with what surely had to be poison. And of the face, only the eyes were identical. Lucian, who played at being the handsome schooled cleric, was a beast whose head more resembled a toad. His mouth was wider than the top of his skull, and row upon row of teeth greeted Odyssean. The brother of Lilith had no nose, not even nostrils, and his chin was hooked so sharply in the middle that Odyssean could almost imagine it being used as a weapon. Well, rasped the demon, his grin literally growing from ear to ear, the latter long and wide, as if for a creature even larger than he. Come, Odyssean, old Diomed. I'll give you a blessing, definitely. Yet, although Lucian was daunting, he no longer instilled fear in the man before him. Only loathing touched Odyssean, loathing that any such abomination could be allowed to exist in his world long enough to taint it. Surely it was wrong that Lucian walked sanctuaries. Yes, that was the name of the world. Lands. Then give it to me, he demanded of the demon. Give it to me. Almost immediately, Odyssean felt the churning in his stomach, as if the organ itself sought to escape. That sensation was joined by a similar one in his lungs, then his heart. He had no doubt that if he let it happen, then all of them would rip free. He wondered if Lucian understood what the spell felt like. Would the demon suffer so? As if his thoughts were action, he saw Lucian suddenly clutch his chest. The demon looked perplexed. Pain was recognizable in his unsettling eyes. He stared at the human. The turbulence in Odyssean's own system ceased. Lucian recovered simultaneously. The demon hissed. Little tricks for little creatures. Seeing no reason to reply, Odyssean strode closer yet. He did not know what he intended to do, just that it had to be done, and done quickly. Curiously, the less distance between them, the less Lucian struck him as even a threat. Odyssean felt a surge of strength adding to his own, and knew it to originate from the Parthens in Cerenthia. They not only had continued to believe in him throughout all of this, but more than ever were certain that he was what they had thought of him. Understanding and appreciating that, Odyssean lunged for his horrific foe. What he did now, he no longer did for himself in the least. All he cared about were those who followed him. His audacious attack left the demon stunned, but only for a second. As the two collided, Lucian's tails flung forward like that of a scorpion's. They struck Odyssean across the back, especially the spine, again and again, sinking all the way inside, yet each time they were immediately repelled, and the wounds would heal in scarcely a heartbeat. Odyssean felt a slight discomfort, nothing more. He managed to seize one tail and, despite the spikes thrust through his palm, tore it off. The demon let out a howl of both pain and outrage. Odyssean contemptuously threw aside the appendage, then sought another. However, Lucian withdrew them, no doubt to use when it was less likely to lose one or both in the process. How was she, my sister? The master demon murmured as the two of them locked together again. Was she all that you ever dreamed? All you ever lusted for? Lilith is every creature's desire, you know. She had so many lovers beside you. But only one did she love. Oh, but not you. Odyssean let Lucian talk. The pain of Lilith's false love still stung deep, but not enough to sway him for what he needed to do. He cared only about stopping his horrific foe. She loved only one, yes, and his name is Inarius. You recall it? Did she mutter it in bed when you were with her? Best to bend down before me, human, than before him. He would not be so gracious. No, not at all. You would be as nothing to him. Nothing at all. Nothing. There it was again. Ever Odyssean was nothing to such beings, just as all humans were nothing to them. No more, he suddenly thought. We, will no longer be nothing to such as this. I will bend to no one, Odyssean finally retorted. He gripped the demon by the throat. Whatever he hoped to do, he had to do it now. The longer they struggled, the more likely that Lucian would find some weakness to exploit. Least of all, one who is nothing to me. Lilith's words came back in a rush, only now he saw them as reversed. He was not the nothing. She and those like her brother were. You are nothing, Lucian, and that is all you deserve to be. The demon started to laugh again, but the laughter turned into a hideous choking. Lucian clutched at the hand holding his throat, but not because Odyssean squeezed tight. In fact, the human only gripped it enough to keep his monstrous adversary at bay. An overriding desire filled Odyssean, a desire to see his worlds become fact. Nothing, Lucian. Nothing. Odyssean blinked. A pale cast swept over the demon. The harsh colors of his body grew faded, as if somehow bleached. Lucian's tails abruptly renewed their frenzied assault, but now they did not even pierce the human's skin. In fact, for all their effort, the tails felt like light touches of wind, and gradually, not even that. And then Odyssean noticed that he could see part of the dark jungle through the demon. That encouraged him to press further. He utterly ignored Lucian's desperately scratching claws, which were no more than the least pinpricks now. At last, the demon cried, "Beware, Odyssean, O Diomed. She is not through with you. My sister never lets go of a toy until it's chewed ragged. But I know her ways. I can help you. I can act as your guide. I will bow to you, call you master. Just listen." "I hear nothing but the calls of the jungle creatures," Odyssean replied with a shake of his head, and the whisper of wind, now already dying down. "Nothing more." Lucian's mouth moved, but now no sound came from it. Under Odyssean's fingers, scale gave way to empty air. The demon was now transparent. His face wore a contorted look of fear, for he did not understand what was happening. What Odyssean was doing was impossible for any human, but not for a Nephilim. And at last the demon became, as Odyssean had said, nothing. The son of Diomedes stood there, his fingers still bent as if holding a throat. Slowly Odyssean straightened them, then studied the palms as if seeking some great truth there. He belatedly sensed his figure cautiously approaching him from behind. Already aware just who it would be, Odyssean slowly turned. Even then, Romus let out a squeak and stepped back several paces. "Forgive me, Master Odyssean. I meant no treachery, coming up on you that way. It's just, it's just that you were standing so still there." "It's all right, Romus. It's all right." "Is it over?" asked the Parthian. "Is the demon dead?" "No, he just isn't. At all." Romus only looked more confused. With a sigh, the son of Diomedes said, "The demon is gone forever. We are all right." However, even as he said the last, Odyssean knew it was otherwise. Around him, still illuminated by the blazing cracks in the ground, lay the wreckage of the jungle and, worse, the bodies of too many who had followed him here. Some he could see were beyond help, but there were others still clinging to life. Without thinking, he walked past Romus and went to the first of the injured. The man's face was vaguely familiar to Odyssean, but otherwise he only knew him as a Parthian. Still, that was enough, and just the thought of what this one's soul had suffered was enough to make an already drained Odyssean shed tears again. He reached down to try to better position the injured man, and a soft glow formed under his palms. The Parthian gasped, his chest swelling to full capacity. Odyssean nearly pulled his hands away, but then he noticed the bruises and cuts on the man's face begin to recede. The shoulder that had been bent as if the arm had become separated seemed to mend. Odyssean kept his hands where they were until the last of the wounds had faded and the Parthian breathed normally. As he rose, he suddenly noticed that there stood around him other Parthians, all staring in rapt awe. Reaching out to one with a bleeding scar across her face, Odyssean repeated the process. When he took his hand away, she too was healed. And so he went from person to person, from those surrounding him to those lying prone on the ground. Odyssean tried to find those most in need of his assistance and help them first. How long he took, he only understood when the first light of day filtered through the thick foliage. Exhaustion filled Odyssean, but so did excitement. He had managed to help all those who could be helped, despite Lilith's claims to the contrary. Doing so thrilled him more than even overcoming Lucian. But that thrill evaporated when he finally confronted Serenthia. She still cradled Achilleus's head in her arms. Odyssean had almost approached her once during his night's work, but had felt guilty, knowing that his friend had perished trying to rescue him. Worse, he had known that Achilles was beyond his powers. There stood another with her, one he had almost thought dead. Mendel, as pale as the dead archer, stood somberly over the lovers. He eyed his brother as Odyssean neared, nodding once. "You did it. She lied." "She lied." He started to ask Mendel about his part in the final moments, but Cerynthia chose that moment to look up at the older brother. "Odyssean, is there nothing?" In truth, he had tried once this night to do the unthinkable. Tried once and failed. Odyssean was not so certain that he had been a bad thing, even if it meant no hope for his friends. "I'm sorry. Nothing." She nodded in understanding, which made his heart ache more for her ordeal. Mendel looked past his sibling to where the Parthens were building a great fire. As was their way, they were preparing to burn the dead. They should bury them. His gaze grew intense as he focused on the pair again. "At least, we should bury Achilles. Do you not agree?" Although slightly unsettled by Mendel's determined expression, Odyssean nodded. This was how it was done in Sarum, save when disease demanded otherwise. Still, it was not his decision to make. "The choice is yours, Sari." "Cerynthia." She did not hesitate. He would prefer to be buried, to be a part of the jungle, if not a forest. Mendel smiled grimly. "I know just the place." The brothers carried Achilles themselves, with only Cyrus's daughter following. When Romus and a few others sought to come, Odyssean forbade them. This was a personal matter. He allowed Mendel to lead. After some trekking through the thick underbrush, Odyssean's brother paused at a lush region nearby, which could be heard a rushing stream. Tall, thick, and healthy trees surrounded the area. Odyssean felt a sense of calm pervading the area and immediately approved of it. Cerynthia, too, acknowledged Mendel's choice as the correct one. With tools borrowed from the Parthens, the pair dug the grave. Odyssean considered seeing what he could do with his abilities rather than his hands, then thought how Achilles deserved more effort than that. The ground was soft and surprisingly easy to remove. They soon had a hole dug deep enough to make certain that no scavengers would dig the body out. After gently depositing the hunter within and filling up the site, the sons of Diomedes and Cerynthia stood in silence. No words were said, for words were inadequate for moments such as this, at least to them. Their souls spoke to the lost one, each bidding him farewell in their own way. It was Cerynthia who finally broke the spell, the dark-tressed woman suddenly turning to Odyssean and crying in his arms. He held her much the way he had held his little sister during her last days. Mendel politely turned his face away, at the same time muttering some final message to Achilles. And then it was over. End of chapter 22.